I thank God for allowing me to serve in His vineyard. By His grace, the Treasury team has safeguarded the funds in the storehouse through sound and responsible financial governance as per the policies of the church. Through the faithfulness of our members, God has provided resources for mission. There has been many challenges and storms, but we have managed to sail through by God's grace. The year 2020 started on a promising note, but suddenly we were locked down. Through the blessings of technology, the church was able to be digitally connected and the work continued despite the lockdown. I want to thank the church members for their continued support during this time. The SAU's financial situation and sub-organizations were not immune from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Most churches throughout the SAU were closed, and many lives and jobs were lost. As a support function of this church, the Treasury team has dedicated themselves to creating an enabling environment to facilitate the church's core business, which is mission. This union experienced a decline in economic growth and disposable income during this term, worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, God has taken care of His church and brought us safely through.
Household debt has increased, where in 2022, out of every rand earned, 76% goes to service debt, leaving 26 cents available for living expenses. From that 26 cents, offerings and tithes must still be returned. The weakening rand has posed a major challenge as prices have escalated. Yet despite all these challenges, God continues to bless His church.
Be excited because great things are going to happen. God bless you.
January to March 2020 was characterized by optimism, with financial prospects for the church looking bright. Then the unexpected happened, a national lockdown on 27 March 2020. The economic and socio-economic pressures on church members and leaders were felt across the SAU.
Around the world that have imposed nationwide lockdowns to curb the spread of the deadly coronavirus. By last night, the country's infection stood at...
The church was thrust into the digitization of management. Daily operations were dominated by video conferencing and electronic data interchange. Even financial audits were conducted off-site using electronic portals. Despite this, there have been positive developments. Projects were funded supporting the church's core business. As a result, church growth continued, albeit at a slower pace. However, this was not reflected in tithe and free will offering despite membership growth. Membership were experiencing hardship, struggling to survive in the depression-like environment. With a negative growth rate compounded by unemployment, the organization had to rely on financing tithe expenditure from non-tithe income. Thus, there was limited investment. Rental income and reserves were used to support cash flow and working capital. The union benefited from the National Disaster Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, helping to compensate for some of the lost income. Staff had to be kept motivated and remunerated, with drastic cost containment measures being put in place and increased efficiency being promoted. Yet despite these measures, the SAU and its sub-organizations struggled to make ends meet. However, God has continued to sustain His work. The union funded various projects from excess working capital, evangelism projects, congresses, workers' meetings, bursaries, and stewardship seminars totaling close to 20 million rand. An appropriation was received from the 13th Sabbath from the GC World Mission offering, which we matched with equal funding to finance the Riverside School project. There has been a considerable decline in tithes and offerings, with a slowdown in membership growth compounding the situation. The average offerings given by each member for 2019 was 3.61 Rand per week. If this increased to 5 Rand, it would mean that the total offering for the SAU would have increased from 35 million Rand to almost 50 million Rand. By 2020, the offering per capita had dropped to 2.63 Rand per member. The offerings compared to tithe show that much education is needed. Offering is our primary non-tithe source of income, which means we cannot fund some of our capital projects due to reduced offering. When we look at 2020, we can see that offering is 7.53% of tithe, with average offering to the tithe from 2016 to 2020 being 11.35%. There has been a decline in growth in mission offering, except for 2018, which increased by 77%. From December 2019 to December 2020, this decline has been 26.46%, due partly to COVID-19, but also following the trend which has been coming on for several years. Along with offerings, tithe has also shown an alarming decrease year on year between 2018 and 2020, after having experienced some gains between 2015 and 2018. The table shows us the percentage change in tithe over the period under review. Let us look at the tithe patterns per conference. The Cape Conference started positively but declined in 2016, increasing up to 2019 and dropping in 2020. The KwaZulu-Natal Free State Conference also started positively, but showed a decline from 2017 to 2019, with a slight increase in 2020 due to audit adjustments. The Lesotho Conference steadily increased up to 2018, followed by a decrease in 2019 and 2020. The Northern Conference of South Africa likewise started positively in 2016, declined in 2017, and reflected a sharp increase in 2019 due to audit adjustments. However, 2020 showed a decline. The church in Namibia was divided into two conferences in 2016. However, from 2017 to 2019, the North Namibia Conference showed a steady increase, reversing the trend in 2020. The South Namibia Conference shows a decline in 2017 with a slight increase in 2018, followed by a decrease in 2019. 2020 shows an increase due to an audit adjustment. The Trans-Orange Conference shows growth from 2016 to 2017 and a decline from 2018 to 2020. The Eswatini Conference's income has held steady up to 2018, followed by a decrease from 2019 to 2020. These reports reflect the impact of COVID-19. However, despite the pandemic, God's blessings are still evident in His church. A sobering factor is that only approximately 30% of the membership is faithful in returning tithe. Of the gross tithe, 68.5% is retained by the local conference and 31.5% is forwarded to the SAU. This is distributed as follows. 7% is passed on to the SID. 10% operates the SAU and its departments. 0.5% is used for evangelistic projects in the conferences and churches. 6.25% funds the retirees' medical aid. 1.5% supports the VOP, with 5% subsidizing Heidelberg College. The 0.25% that remains goes to SEDMED as medical aid top-up. In 2016, the balance of cash and investments was 232 million Rand, representing 41.4% increase from the start of the previous 5 years. At the end of 2020, this figure increased by 50% to 349 million Rand. Total liabilities increased by 108% to 37 million Rand, and total net assets increased by 45.2% to 312 million Rand for the same period. 66.7% and 74.7% of total assets and net assets, respectively, were held in the form of cash and investments. Accounts receivable, representing 22% of our current assets, is unhealthy due to some organizations not honoring their payment plans. The total operating income averaged 100 million rand annually. 43.2% was from tithe, 19.9% from offerings, 16.6% from investment income, and 20.3% from other operating income, with tithe being the primary source of earned income. While there was a steady increase, a decline is evident in 2020, primarily due to COVID-19. The total expenses for the quinquennium averaged 76 million rand. The total operating income and expenses are depicted in the graph above. The SAU has managed to reflect a surplus through cost containment and strict budget control. At the close of 2020, the Southern Africa Union Conference showed 137.42% working capital and 109.31% in liquidity. Working capital is your current assets, less current liabilities, and the cash you have to run day-to-day operations. It means that you can cover your running costs and the organization can pay its expenses and remain afloat in the event of unforeseen costs. The high receivables from sub-organizations impact the union's working capital. Church policy prescribes that recommended working capital be 100%. Over the past 5 years, we have maintained this level. Our liquidity has also remained above 100%, except for 2018, where we recorded a 95% liquidity. If liquidity remains above 100%, it means that if the organization was liquidated, it could cover its long and short-term liabilities. Therefore, our current position is healthy. In 2015, we reported that we were still owing 7,074,289 rand on the pension loan from the General Conference that was taken to prop up the pension fund. I am happy to report that we settled the loan to the GC in September 2018. Looking at investments, the pie chart shows the profile of nominal capital, which is mainly term deposits with local commercial banks, as reflected in the December 2020 audited financial statements. There are two long-term investments, the pension fund and the retirees' medical aid fund. The SAU investment profile is prescribed by surplus funds, which are restricted and held in trust. This dictates the terms of investments based on liquidity needs and the owners of the funds, guided by the SID investment policy S90-20. After experiencing a financial downturn in 2020, the last 2 years reflect a rebound. This is not for us to return to business as usual, but to allow breathing room to engage in strategic thinking about how best to use God's resources. The turnaround inspires us to continue being faithful stewards. At the end of 2021, the balance of cash and investments was 267 million rand, a 15% increase from 2020. Total current assets increased by 8% to 360 million rand, while total liabilities decreased by 44% to 21 million rand. Total net assets increased by 13% to 352 million rand for the same period. At the end of 2021, 71.5% and 75.7% of total assets and net assets respectively were held in the form of cash and investments. The total revenues and gains for 2021 were 108 million rand, a 20% increase from 2020. Of this, 83.6% was from tithe, 1.4% from offerings, 13.6% from investment returns, and 1.4% from other operating income. The total operating expenses for 2021 were 60 million rand, and of which 41.7% was for employee-related expenses, 6.2% for travel expenses, 7.5% for admin and general expenses, 4.8% for plant expenses, and 39.7% were for appropriations. Assistance and counsel were given in working with the conferences and other sub-organizations. In addition, training programs such as Internal Control Seminar were organized to assist in better preparation for audits and improve the overall audit opinions. The General Conferencing Auditing Service, an independent audit agency of the Church, is tasked to audit the SAU. In the past 5 years, successive audit committees constituted of professional SDA non-church employees as per SID policy S34 were involved in reviewing the organization's audit results and the subsequent management's responses to ensure internal control, accountability and transparency. As a result, the union recently received a qualified audit opinion, mainly because of the sub-organization's balances feeding into our financial statements. Additionally, unidentified deposits at conference level have also affected our income. The SAU continues to receive adjustments from conferences long after the year end, resulting in the SAU receiving audit adjustments on trust funds not remitted to the higher organization. Mr. Kudzai Masuga will share the recent 2020 audit report, which has been presented to the Audit Review Committee and the Executive Committee.
Managing the finances of the union during this challenging quinquennium was a huge and daunting responsibility. Thus, I need to express my gratitude to God for His strength and guidance to be able to fulfill my duties. I appreciate the support, assistance, leadership and counsel from the SID CFO and officers. My fellow SAU executive officers, Dr. Dave Spencer and Pastor Trevor Kunene, for their leadership, support and friendship, along with Mr. Mkolisi Ngube, Associate Executive Secretary. To Mr. Eric Odendal, the former CFO, mentored me. His input and growth of the SAU will forever be appreciated. Thank you, SAU Treasury team, for your commitment and loyalty. Appreciation is expressed to the conference financial officers and their teams from the local church to the conference. I also want to thank the directors and staff of the SAU. It was a privilege to serve with you in God's vineyard. A very special thank you to my husband, my 2 children, and the wider family for their support and understanding, especially during the long hours I spent at the office, including many weekends away from home.